I just want to introduce Hesse. He's a professor at the University of St. Thomas and also the researcher. He did scientist. He did a lot of work internationally. He just returned from Switzerland. He gave a presentation there in the Conference on Science. And so he's really a very competent scientist. What we shared this morning is really powerful, and he was able to take a very complicated and not easy to understand scientific kind of discoveries and simplify it to such a way that we can relate to, we can understand, and into his religious kind of practice, he was able to connect science with our own faith. So it's good for us to have someone like him. A sister asked me to give the presentation. I study a lot in science when I was at Berkeley, but my scientific knowledge is very limited. So I have to ask him to help me out because he's more an expert in the field. So now I just want to introduce Hesse to share with us some of his experience of science and how science has helped him to become more committed.
Thank you, Father. You just gave me cold water. Mine was in the car. I was going to have hot tea after that. So thank you. I'm honored to be here. And how many were at the morning session? God was on it. 5 or 6. Okay, so what we're going to do is, we were in a bit of a rush this morning. We went through a lot of stuff. We have more time this afternoon. So for those who were not here this morning, I'm going to give a little bit of review. These are the presentation outlines. That's what we covered this morning. Talking about revelation and principles and how we're going to do this. Thank you. And then we talked physics to creation, chemistry to life, and then we had very little time for questions because we actually got into the second section this morning. And the second section we did not cover review because we had just been through it. Biology to consciousness, psychology to mysticism, and we didn't have much time for questions. So this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about review of part 1, and then basically, I'm going to talk about review of part 1, then I'll go into these 2 subjects, and I think we'll have a little time to do some other things that might be of interest. I think 2 hours is a little bit too long to go straight through. Maybe we'll take a break halfway. What do you think, brother? Yeah. Okay? So, but we'll have time for questions and answers at the end, plenty of time, and we might have time for something special that I didn't plan on. So each section is going to be broken up into like a heading. This is a review of part 1. Most of us, at least when I was young, I always thought, gosh, if a miracle, it's a miracle, it must have violated the laws of nature. Well, that's not what St. Augustine of Hippo said. He said miracles are not contrary to nature, but only contrary to what we know about nature. Now, isn't that kind of wonderful? Because the real miracle is this. Look at outside, the birds and us here. And then to say to God, okay, now we want to really be impressed. Make an exception to all this. Isn't that kind of insulting? You know, so I always thought it was insulting. I'm adjusting my hearing aids. I'm high-tech over this. Okay. So it really is kind of insulting to God, I think, to say it that way. So I'm in agreement with St. Augustine. And he was basically giving us a little encouragement to understand how God has presented himself to us. Now, the way God reveals himself to us is threefold. It's through nature, tradition, and scripture, chronologically in that order. Tradition, one could say it started with Jesus' public ministry. That's when the word of tradition was started passed down verbally. And then there was scripture, obviously, in the final version was in the 400s AD. So we're going to start from 13.7 million years ago. God has been revealing himself to us for much longer, and we don't talk about it that much. So let's look at how God is revealing himself to us. What is the visible universe? 200 to 700 plus billion stars per galaxy. Our Milky Way has 200 billion. And others they think are bigger, we're not sure. There are between 100 and 170 plus billion galaxies in the universe. That's a total, doing the math, anywhere from 20 to 1,190 billion trillion stars. It's mind-boggling. We can't get our mind around how big this is. If we're going to learn from nature, it would seem to me that we start with what the universe is. How big is it? We got to ask the question, how big is big? The second is that all of those stars and everything are really not the total universe. They're only the visible portion. Those totals are only 4% of the universe. Now, get your head around that. The other 96% is dark matter and dark energy. We get so big, we can't even comprehend it. Now, the four forces of nature that started at the beginning of the Big Bang were so fine-tuned that it led to an anthropic principle that scientists are grappling with. Basically, it says this: the four forces of nature were so extremely fine-tuned at the beginning of the Big Bang that the likelihood of the emergence of a single cell in the universe is like a tornado sweeping through a junkyard and assembling a Boeing 747 from the materials therein. What do you think the probability of that is? Well, Father Spitzer, a brilliant guy, didn't calculate this, but it's actually, I saw it just recently in Roger Penrose's book. It was the mathematician who helped Stephen Hawking. That's 1 in 10 to the 10th, and then that to the 123rd. Now, you know what 10 to the 10th is. That means 10 plus 10 zeros. Now, take that 123 times. It's mind-boggling. So, you mean to tell me that we were here by accident? That the universe wasn't created in anticipation of us coming? Of course. The math shows it. The uncertainty principle. Subatomic, there were quantum leaps between different orbits for electrons around an atom. Okay? Now, you may not know chemistry, but that's the way it is. Newtonian physics used to say that, well, we would be able to walk from here to the bank and know that each foot goes in front of the other and we get there. Quantum mechanics was saying that we were walking along and instantaneously we were at the bank. That's not reality the way we experience it in our day-to-day lives. That suddenly, instantaneously, I'm at the bank and I spend no time in between. I didn't travel at the speed of light, I just was there. That's what's happening to electrons between orbits. Basically, Schroeder, this is known as the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, 1927. The more precisely the electron position is determined, the less precisely the momentum is known, and vice versa. Now, you may say, who cares? What difference does it make? It makes a huge amount of difference, because scientists up until then thought that everything was measurable. In fact, they would say that if it's not measurable, then it doesn't exist. That was science. Now suddenly they all agree with this. They had to finally change their paradigm thinking. So, can we measure God? Obviously not. But does that mean God doesn't exist? Well, not according to this. We can't tell. Okay. So, that's another principle. The other is quantum entanglement. Scientists started to experiment with calcium, a calcium atom, and they bombarded it with energy. And the calcium atom would give off a pair of photons. Paired meaning one was up spin and the other down spin. And they decided, well, what happens if I change the spin on one? Well, they found out the other changed instantly. not at the speed of light, instantly. So then they thought, well, maybe this was just close proximity. So they reflected these photons off 12 kilometers, 7 miles. They changed one. That one changed instantly. Not at the speed of light. So it's a quantum effect. Einstein said this is spooky. That was Einstein's reaction to this. Scientists accept this. In fact, it's more than accepted. The Chinese now have, it's not been done in the US, but the most recently was the Chinese. And they basically now have been able to communicate through this phenomenon across hundreds of miles. Because up and down is the same language as the computer, which is a base 2 system. The electricity is on or off. Our base 10 is 0, 1, 3, up to 9. Base computers are base 2, all on and off. Any number, any concept can be communicated in both base 10 or base 2. Well, basically, they've been successful. So we're going to get to a point where we can instantaneously communicate around the world. Now, the only reason it's going to be slowed down is the equipment slowing it down, because you got to convert the signal to something we can hear. But the actual transmission is instantaneous. This phenomenon exists regardless of distance. This phenomenon exists across, and can exist across, the whole universe. The universe is expanding. It's expanding so fast, and it's accelerating. It's expanding so fast that it would take 56 billion light years to get across it. This would do it instantly. Mind-boggling. I agree with Einstein when he said this is spooky.
That means it does not have to rely on the speed of light at all.
No, it's not restricted by the speed of light.
So this morning we shared that this reflecting in the lives of the saints, like Saint Francis of Assisi, he can simultaneously at 2 places appear. And that means God community is not limited by time and space. By the speed of light, he can instantly reveal himself to people at all time. All time. I mean, the past million years ago, or now, or the future. It's all God is not confined by time and space. So that's why we see the miracles happen in the life of the saint. Those who completely immerse themselves or become united with Christ, or they empty himself or herself to allow God to be alive in their life. That life that St. Paul said, I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. They can simultaneously appear in 2 different places in the world, or in different galaxies. And it's not controlled or limited by the speed of light. And that's incredible.
It's incredible. Now, by the way, I'm recording this morning and this afternoon, so I'm going to put this on YouTube for anybody who was not able to make both sessions. Because this morning session, we actually went into a little more detail. Now, DNA. The DNA molecule is 6.5 feet long. And every DNA molecule in your body has the full code of your whole body. And you talk about a kind of a oneness of the universe and God's design. The difference between your DNA and mine is about, we share probably 99%. Now, since you both were the same family, probably a little bit higher, okay? But look at this: chimpanzees 97, cats 90, a fruit fly 60%. So we think that there's not a oneness to God's design. What if we thought of DNA in humans as a scientific way of looking at the body of Christ? We each have the God dwelling within us, and that God that dwells within us is the total God, but God dwells within everyone. So we're the body of Christ. The full map of the human is in the DNA, and that person has billions of DNA molecules in them. Each one of them has a full map. Now,
so that means we have the potential to grow into the likeness of Christ. That's why we say in the church teaching that we are the image of God. Imago Deo. I mean, each one of us is the image of God. It's amazing here. It says that even the animal, the fruit fly shares some DNA with humanity too, 60%. That means there's a commonality there. And when we talk about spiritual reality, that means we are sharing the divine nature of God. That's in and through the incarnation of Christ. We become members of the mystical body of Christ. And that's a very interesting concept. We say that in DNA we can really say that we share some commonality with the whole universe. And the whole universe is originated, maybe perhaps from one origin. Okay, later on we will see that.
I thank God every day for giving me the 40% so that I'm not a fruit fly. Now, chaos theory. Chaos theory came about in a rather interesting way. When computers started to get real powerful, they decided the first problem to put them on was predicting weather. The reason was weather is very difficult to predict. It's very a lot of calculation. And the other is that it's extremely important, has effect on the harvesting of crops. So it can cause billions of dollars worth of loss if you can't predict the weather. So they put the cards into the computer. This was back when I was young. And we used to put cards in the night before. Next morning, you go for the results. Well, like any good scientist, you looked at the results and you said, well, do these make sense? And so the scientists looked at them and they said, this is crazy. This doesn't make a sensible answer. So they went back and they checked their data, and sure enough, they made a minuscule mistake on the input. So they changed it. What they had discovered accidentally was chaos theory. Basically, the way they describe it now, just to give a sense of it, is that there's so many variables in the universe that we can't possibly calculate them all. But we know enough that if there's just the slightest one off, it'll change the future. And the way they demonstrate that is a little saying called the butterfly effect. If a butterfly in Beijing flaps its wings, the weather in New York will change. And chaos theory, that's true. In fact, what I'm saying is even though we can't calculate it, chaos is not chaotic. It actually is structured. And if you don't think it's structured, they plotted it. They graphed chaos in a calculation, and it looks something like this. These are magnificently beautiful images, and what's interesting about them is that they're repetitive from the macro to the micro level. So that if you look at this whole section, you see a pattern. If you were to cut this section up, you would see the same pattern. If you cut this section up right here, you'd see the same pattern, ad infinitum. Down. Amazing, amazing. Now that was the view of the physics to creation and the chemistry to life in a real nutshell. If you want to see more detail, you can look at the YouTube site, because we went into the physics of the universe and a bunch of different things. Okay.
How can we apply the chaos theory to our own life, in our own spiritual life, or faith life? There are a lot of experiences we have in our life which seem to be very chaotic because we do not understand. See, a tragedy, an accident, a sickness, or unpleasant experiences happen in our life, make our life become chaotic, disordered, and unhappy, confused, disoriented. And all of these are really chaotic. We don't make sense. We don't find meanings. And if we don't find order in those experiences, when we just experience that, okay? But then we will change the perspective. After many periods of prayer, and you take time away from the experience and going through it, go into it, and to look deeply into it, look at it from the perspective of God, you begin to see the meaning, the purpose. And maybe 20, 30 years from now, when you look back, you say, thank you to God that I went to that experience. With that experience, I would not be who I am right now. So that's time you begin to see all of the pattern of how God involves in your life, to make sense out of something seem to be disorder and chaos. So because we don't see the totality, we see only 4% of the reality, and the rest of them is in dark matter or the dark matter. So that's why we don't see it. So don't jump to conclusion too fast. Be patient, trusting in the providential care of God. Slowly engage yourself in unpacking the gift that God's giving you, and you begin to see that every single event that's happening in your life, God concurs in your experience. CONCUR. God allows it, God get involved with it and try to reveal to us how much He loves us. And if we have the faith, we stand on the point of view, perspective of God, and we will see everything. We will be grateful to God because of those experiences in our lives. So every chaotic experience can become a grace-filled experience. That is me.
Now, prior to the Heisenberg uncertainty principle and chaos theory, scientists thought that it was, in nature was predictable. Okay. In other words, what's called scientism, which is an extreme position. Scientism says everything can be described by science. Well, those two things just explain that even scientists now recognize they can't. The religious analogy to that is fundamentalism. You've heard of that. I mean, they interpret Scripture literally. Science is not important. Both of those extremes are wrong. So the big question then became one, well, does God intercede in nature to help us? And if He does, how does He not violate St. Augustine's quote? Well, now He can intercede at the micro level, subatomic level, through quantum Heisenberg uncertainty principle. He can change things without violating the uncertainty, without violating the rules of nature, and we wouldn't know. Because scientists agree that we can't know nature completely. In fact, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle basically put science in the boat of saying nature is designed such we can never know it completely. And then on the macro level, it goes to chaos theory. We still can't make a determination. So God can and does, in my belief system, intervene, and it doesn't violate the laws of nature.
And that's important, because when you talk about the teaching of the Holy Spirit, the Holy Spirit can really actually get involved in the micro level, the subconscious level, and the level that we can never detect and understand. And actually that's happening. God's doing a lot of healing in our own unconsciousness and the different layers of unconsciousness, in our sub or unconsciousness at that level. And that level we cannot even take the picture, we cannot see it, which even science can never understand that. We never realize this. For the rest of our life, we never come to understand the mystery of God, mercy and providence. So you can see that this chaos theory and all of these, the quantum physics is really help us to recognize that really there's a mystery of God's infinite love, and God is instantly can be at different level, micro level and macro level, and can do a lot of transformation just for the good of us. Okay, how do we see and how we come to believe God? We need to learn to recognize we are so small. But this is small, like the sand on the grain of sand on the beach. But God's infinity love us. So the whole universal reality is in our brain, in our whole being, our DNA. It's amazing. The more you talk about science, the more you come to believe that God's infinite wisdom and mercy and love.
Well, I just gave a talk at the Science for Consciousness conference in Switzerland about 5 or 6 weeks ago, and I will share with you what I presented. But that's been around for 25 years, and that is the frontier of research. It's what is consciousness. The frontier of research is trying to determine that. They've been working on it for 25 years, and I was there, listened to a lot of the talks, and I can tell you science isn't anywhere close. But the brain has been mapped. I mean, we have a pretty good idea of where certain functions are in the brain. I'm not going to go through every one of these, but I can tell you overall that the frontal lobes are the youngest part of the brain and the one that makes the moral decisions. The stem is the oldest, and here, you know, you have memory, basic emotions, language, a lot of the perceptions of the outside world through our five senses is in the back. Okay?
Okay, can I say something here? You heard a lot about called intelligence, because they EQ, intelligence, the emotional intelligence. And this one, hypothalamus, this one, the brain is very small, but this is really have a quantum physics kind of movement. And when you encounter some danger, and sometimes you have intuitive kind of reaction, and it just tell you to stop at the right time before the accident happens or something disastrous will happen in your life. And this will bypass all of the communication in your computer system in your brain. It will go straight to your action, your movement, and tell you, just like when you're riding the car, like this morning I said my friend was driving on the road in the mountain in Taiwan, in Alishan, very tall, and suddenly he just stopped the car. I mean, it was so fast, he stopped within maybe 30 seconds. And then if he just continued to ride, the rock would fall down on his car and kill his whole family. But he just stopped, and he doesn't understand why did he stop. He just asked, the professor Bob Hesse said that it just bypass all of the brain, and then go directly to the feet and tell the feet to push on the brake. And what
well, studies have been done on that, and I'll be talking about conscious and unconscious, but studies have shown that the foot moves to the brake before the brain recognizes the problem. And they'll talk about conscious, unconscious. So anyway, it's been pretty well mapped, but the truth is, science knows very little about the brain. Now, I won't get into this too much detail, but if one believes in God, these are the various parts of the brain that will perceive God in different ways. So the occipital parietal will identify God as an object. Parietal frontal gives our relationship with God. Frontal integrates intellectual and religious God. The thalamus gives holistic emotional sense of God. The amygdala can lead to emotional fear of God. Studies have shown that if you have a religion that teaches a fear of God, you've got some serious sick illness coming with these people. They can't heal very well. So love is the key. And studies have shown if you have a religion that teaches fear, there's serious medical problems. Striatum can lead to emotional security in God, and the anterior cingulate can lead to loving God. So there are parts of the brain that will relate to that if you believe in God. Now, in terms of the relative magnitude, just to give a sense of not only the size of the universe that we talked before, but how big this brain is too. 100 plus billion galaxies, 100 billion cells in the brain. Wow. 200 plus billion stars per galaxy, 1 billion neurons. In other words, the brain is extremely complex. But this is interesting. In the visible, in the invisible of the cosmos, 90%, 44% is visible, 96% invisible, dark energy, dark matter. The conscious brain uses about 5% of the real estate. The unconscious, about 95% of the real estate. Interesting that those are similar. Now, there are dualities in the brain. Now, I don't want to get the term dualities mixed up with the belief system that we as Catholics have. The principle behind these presentations is that we have, in our faith, we have non-duality. There's non-duality principle. In other words, we believe the body and soul are meant for each other. We're reunited with the body in heaven. The God and man are meant for each other, and God will share some of His divinity with us. And faith and science are meant to be together, complementary. Now, this is different than, say, Buddhism, where that's dual. And so I was in Myanmar not long ago, formerly Burma, and I recall when I was young that the monks because they were angry at the leadership, which was terrible, immolated themselves. And that was not suicide. From their standpoint, they were killing just the body because they're going to get another body. So dualism and non-dualism are fundamental to how we approach this. Okay. So there are right and left hemispheres in the brain. You've heard people say, well, I'm right brain, you're left brain more language, right brain more math or whatever. And there have been surgeries conducted to split the two in half to avoid epilepsy. And it has some very strange effects because the brain is disconnected. Present and future are dualities that we have to deal with. If you're an alcoholic, you put the liquor away, you sell all liquor and get it out of the house, because when you're really desirous of it, if it's not there, you won't take it. So you're essentially dealing with the present to shut up to deal with the future. Multiple stable stimuli. This is the images that you've seen, the two faces facing each other. You say, well, those faces, or is that the contour of a coffin? You know, and most people can't see both at the same time. Emotion and reason, and conscious and unconscious. Now, I'm going to explore the conscious and unconscious because that's critical. Phineas Gage, interesting story, hard to see, but he's holding a crowbar, and in the late 1800s, the crowbar was straight, with flat end and pointed top, about 6 foot long crowbar. You'll notice his left eye is closed. Phineas Gage was the person who put the charges along the highway in New Hampshire, and the way making way for the railroad, so blasting the rock away. And the way they do that, and you may have, if you've driven around that part of the world or anywhere, you may see a series every 10 or 15 feet of semi-cylindrical sections. And what they did is they drilled a hole, they planted charges, went to the next one, and then they detonated them all at the same time, and the rock just flops off. Well, he was the guy that tapped the charges. Well, one day, and by the way, he was a really religious man. He didn't drink, he didn't curse, he didn't womanize, he went to church all the time, model husband. The community thought he was wonderful. And then one day, he went to tap in the charge, and there was a charge already in there. And then, this is what happened. It launched, and because it was pointed on the end, it went right through. It went below his left eyeball and came out the right front part of his brain. And because it was pointed and happened very quickly, because all that force was like a rocket, and because it was hot, it cauterized the wound, so he healed. So it was very, very unusual to have that major wound and survive. There was a problem. When it happened and it got all done, he started to drink, curse, he womanized, he didn't attend church, and everybody in the community said he's evil, he's going to hell, he's sinning. They condemned him. Well, at about 30 years ago, I think it is now, they exhumed his body, and they discovered that his frontal lobes had been wiped out. The frontal lobes are key to making moral decisions. Not the only thing required, but they're known to be key, and the youngest part of the brain. So basically, his functionality was really affected. Michael May, another interesting story. We learn sometimes more about the brain by the problems than the real signs of normal people. Michael May, at the age of about a month, lost his eyesight due to an explosion. And at age 45, doctors felt that they had a surgical procedure that could restore his sight. Well, restoring sight medically is very rare. It's very unusual, and this was an unusual case. And when they unwrapped the bandages, they had his wife and his 2 children in front of him, whom he had never seen before, and they were all excited. And they unwrapped the bandages, and he was elated with the bombardment of this sensory perception. And by the way, sight is the biggest portion of the brain is dedicated to the 5 senses. The biggest proportion is dedicated to sight. And he was just elated. Now, they were keeping a close eye on his case because it was very unusual to be able to restore sight. And it reminds me of a homily I did on sight and insight, when Jesus restores sight. This is really a good example of sight and insight. The only problem is, the next day he couldn't remember his wife's face. He couldn't tell the difference between the trees and the forest. He had no depth perception. If a ball was flying at him, he couldn't tell whether it was a ball or a sphere. I mean, a ball or a rectangle. He had some serious problems. What happened? We talked about the conscious and unconscious. What happens is, when we're young, we're storing paradigms in our unconscious, because the unconscious is very fast, and we don't need to think about it so much. So what happens is, as you're growing as a young child, you don't have to examine your mother's face. You see a mole on the side, and unconsciously you know that's your mother. We don't even think about what my mother looks like. I know who she is, and so basically with time he was able to improve and store his own paradigms in his unconsciously, to make room in the conscious brain to make the slower, more important decisions. Those decisions became very simple. So we've learned a lot about the brain here in just these two cases. So the unconscious and the conscious. The unconscious is very fast, automatic, implicit, heuristic, intuitive, reactive, impulsive. Limbic system, that's the old part of the brain, is the oldest. And conscious is slow, systematic, explicit, analytic, rule-based, proactive, reflective, neocortex, the youngest part of the brain. This is where we make our moral decisions. This is where habitual sin gets stored. This is where habitual, not just grace gets stored in here. Okay, good virtues are stored in here too. So that's why habitual sin is really tough, because it's buried in the unconscious. So what's in the unconscious? Well, I mentioned a few. Obviously, the good things are in the unconscious. We have virtues that we become habitual at. But all of the prejudicial isms are in there too. And I invented the word religionism because some people are anti one religion or another, and that's a form of prejudice. Okay, so the question is then, what is this deal with consciousness and conscience? Now, the duality of the brain forces us to have to use a free will, because we have to have some freedom to make decisions between the conflicts. Well, strangely enough, the Greeks had only one word, synthesis, for consciousness and conscience. Now, these are pretty major different things, and yet they only had one word. So consciousness is the external self-awareness. So if I look out there and I tell you that's a tree out there, and there is no tree, well, that's pretty erroneous, because there is a tree. So you want to, obviously, true consciousness is important. And the conscience, there's sincere and insincere. So I can say something's morally right by rationalizing it is not sincere. But ironically, the Greeks weren't the only one. All of the Romance languages, French, Spanish, Italian, have only one word for both of these. So in English, we're fortunate to have two. I don't know about Vietnamese, but fortunately we have two. Now the question becomes one of, what is moral culpability in the eyes of God? Now this is Aquinas, but it's consistent with what we learned from Michael May and what we learned from Phineas Gage. Basically, an act or omission is morally wrong, and we learn that through our informed conscience, with the operative word being informed. In other words, we educate ourselves, and we do all of that judgment in the conscious brain. Now, we also make it morally culpable in the eyes of God. We also have to have full knowledge and full freedom. But only God can make those judgments. So those people that were condemning Phineas Gage were wrong. And I don't know of another religion. You've done a lot of interfaith work, Father. I have too. I don't know of another religion that makes this distinction between objective and subjective sin. In other words, objectively it's a morally wrong. I keep saying morally wrong rather than sinful because our English even confuses the issue. But we can objectively say it's morally wrong, but we can't say the guy or gal committed a sin. If you see somebody shooting somebody, I'm telling you, every other Christian denomination I've talked to a lot of them, and I'm not sure about Episcopal. They may have a little of this, I'm not sure, but the Baptists, everybody I've talked to basically says, well, then that guy committed a sin in the eyes of God. Well, hold it. What about letting God make the decision? I mean, it's just unbelievable. So, Phineas Gage, obviously, in my mind, didn't have full knowledge or full freedom, nor did Michael Bay. But Phineas Gage was a major accident. I mean, it was pretty obvious. The problem with science is it doesn't know the brain that well, so there could be a minor chemical wrong, making somebody bipolar or whatever, and then we have to react the way Mother Teresa acted when she had the man in the streets and she brought him in and cleaned up his wounds and even maggots all over him. She was cursing him the whole way. And the elder nun said to her, "Sister, how can you do this? How can you do that when he's cursing you?" And she said, "Well, Jesus was just having a bad day." Now, I'm not suggesting that's good theology, but the point is, the real part of that theology that's solid is that she was treating the God within him. She was not judging his actions, because only God can do that.
We never know fully what's going on in the unconscious level of the person. So that's why the church said we should never jump to the conclusion in making judgment of anyone's behavior. We can see the act. The act is unacceptable, it's moral, it's wrong. But do we see that he has full knowledge of that, he has full intention and the freedom of that? When we are all situated in the context of sin, the sins of our family of origin, and you know, there's many things that really limited our freedom and our intention because there's so many unconsciously working on our own consciousness, and the person is not really free totally. So in some way, we say that God doesn't make unfair judgment of anyone. I mean, God is full of mercy, even though He may know everything about us, but He knows that we are very much conditioned by our own context, by our own circumstances, by our own background, by our own unconscious factors. So actually, the more you understand this kind of scientific discoveries, the more you discover that God is really, it's revealed a lot of things. That's why God is so merciful, God is so unconditionally loving toward us, because He sees all of the complexities of our brain, and it's at the unconscious level, we are being victimized already before we were born, you know. I mean, it's what's happened in your mother's life, and then what happened in your father's life, and the family of origin of the father, of the mother, and they come together, and there's so many things that really become the variables that's affecting how you are now. You become who you are because of a lot of things. You really have no choices, you know. You don't have a choice to be born in that family. And so that's why you are conditioned by a lot of facts. And that's why today I talk about the facts of our life. But even that facts, some of the facts are distorted, some facts are truthful, you know.
In our secular world, there is no distinction. So in our secular world, we're being asked, when the Pope said, "I'm not going to judge that person," remember how the secular world interpreted that? They said, "Well, he's not going to call that a sin. Well, that person sinned it," you know, and they started to launch on him. He was making the distinction that he was not going to play God in moral culpability.
Some of the conservative, older conservative bishops or cardinals in the church sometimes make a very rough judgment of Pope Francis. You know, Pope Francis is really well-formed in all of the discovery of science, scientific discoveries, and he's really a very good understanding of the theology and science and all of the things about what we are discovering now. And so he make a lot of statements which is really very humble, acknowledging that human understanding and knowledge is so limited. How dare we make judgment whether that person is really commit mortal sin or not? So actually, Pope Francis is really for me one of the most integrated. I said many times, Pope Francis has the brain of Pope Paul VI. He has the courage, the guts of John Paul II. He has the compassion of John 23rd, you know. I mean, he really integrate the best of those three popes together in him. So you need to really listen to him, because he really embodied that mercy of God for us.
Now, I don't want to give any particular examples, but in our society today, if I say that I think something that's done is morally wrong, they will say, well, you are being sexist or racist. You put labels on it, you know, that you're judging a person. Well, I'm never going to culpably condemn an individual for moral culpability. Oh, that's God's deal. But that doesn't mean that I have to agree with their actions.
Yeah, we can say
that's a key difference, and they will not make that distinction. They'll hold you to prejudice if otherwise.
As we can say the act is morally wrong. You cannot make a judgment of the person. You say that person is really morally evil. Okay, that's a judgment on the person.
But it's hard to deal with people in that level, because you don't want to go there, because they won't get this.
They will try to nail you down and say that you are not really understanding the church teachings.
Yeah. Can I have one question? How about this one? It's about confession.
Oh, what?
Confession.
Confession?
Yeah.
What
we over here look like we can condemn the other person. When we go confession, we condemn ourselves, right?
You are not condemning yourself, you acknowledge your sins.
Yeah.
You name your sins. Don't use the word condemning. We're not condemning ourselves. We are admitting that we are sinful. Okay? And then as much we know about our own intentionality, about our own freedom of choice, and we acknowledge that we know that acts we committed, we did, hurting people, hurting ourselves. So we, in front of the priest, admitting our sinful nature, and we ask God for forgiveness. And God, perhaps in His mercy, already forgiving us. What we are confessing in the confession room is to reconcile ourselves with ourselves, and with others, and with God, and then we ask for the graces of God to help us to reform ourselves, to be converted, to turn around and try to change our lives. Okay? Don't use the word condemning. I think condemning is so strong.
Well, my wife was bipolar, okay? And she would get upset with herself and condemn herself because she did something wrong before. Well, when she was doing that wrong before, I knew she didn't have full knowledge or full freedom. So basically, I let God do the condemning. I let God do the condemning of others, and I try to let God do the condemning of me.
You think God will do the condemning?
No. When I say He's going to make the judgment.
Yeah, that's
okay.
Right.
In my wife's case, I have no fear that He would say that you were not culpable. But my point is that we have to let God be God. We want to be God ourselves.
That's the point. So even in confession room, you confess your sin, you do your part. But you be honest and truthful, but you let God be God. Don't try to play the role of God.
Now, collective synodesis does exist. It's collective consciousness is really medicine or science, etc. They have certain sense together that something is what to do, etc. And then the collective conscience exists really in religion and the state laws, etc. And so all of these things got to be taken into account when we inform our conscience. And these are not in order of priority, but all of these things, and they're not necessarily the total list, have to be considered in our conscious mind in order to make a decision about what's morally right and wrong.
Now you are a catechist, okay? When you look at that, you are teaching the children or whoever coming to your class the catechetical teachings of the church. You need to understand you have to give them authentic religious teachings. Authentic, it's not distorted perception. You cannot just use in black and white moral teaching and say, if you are doing that, you are condemned to hell. You cannot do that. You have to give them, help them to understand that there is a moral regulation, moral standards, and the authentic religious teachings. And you need to tell the story of the church and the story of Christ and help them to encounter Christ and love Christ. And love Christ, not simply fear committing sin, but because when you commit the sin, you go to hell. You not go to church on Sunday, you go to hell. And that is just you want to scare people from not going to church. But you need to teach them how to love God and love these values. The value that Jesus embodied in His life, the values of compassion, caring for the poor, the outcast, the marginalized, the values of of self-emptying, of giving oneself, like sacrifice, serving people, and then you need to really give a very good understanding of sacred scripture. And these and the natural law, civil law, so you need to be well informed in order to confirm the conscience of the students who are coming into your class. And you need to basically become a spiritual guide, or I don't want to use the word advisors, but guide can help the kids in your class when they have some crisis in their life. You help them to discern, really question for them, make them become aware of God and aware of the church teaches so that they can make making decisions for their life. And you need to present scientific studies. Today we try to give you that book, Hesse. And I try to give you a very clear and objective understanding of scientific discoveries and how these science related to our church, to theology, to teaching, and a lot of things. We need to really have an open mind and learn all the time, and see that God is using all of these things to do what? To inform us, to make us become freer, become more alive, become fuller as a human person. If you teach something, you make people become slaves, like all of the fundamentalist groups, whether Islamic or whether whatever religion, they're trying to tell you that you have to do this, and you kill many people, and you will go to heaven. And when you're heaven, you have solved all of the sexual kind of fulfillment. All of the things are distorted. You brainwash people into doing something wrong. So informed counsel, that means you make a person become alive, become basically mature, can make decisions, can discern what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is better, and what is the best. Okay? And that's important.
Now, by the way, this is I especially use this for bioethics, because there the decisions can get really complicated.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a benevolent God. Frontal lobes, stop judging if you may not be judged. Unconscious brain, stop judging, you will not be judged. Stop condemning, and you will not be condemned. Forgiven, you will not be forgiven. Now, there are research conferences that have covered various subjects, and I've given presentations at all of these. The first is secular, dualistic, and at the Mind and Life conference, Thomas Keating, Rabbis Monk, asked me to represent him there, and it was mainly Buddhist, and we presented various things. Then at the Brain, Death, and Desires of Consciousness, that was where there were problems with brains, and you learn a little bit about the brain when you find out what the problems are. But the two really religious ones are the Conference on Medicine and Religion, which is co-sponsored by Harvard, the University of Chicago, and the Institute for Spirituality and Health, of which I'm connected. And it was in Houston 2 years in a row, and we'll talk about that. And then its counterpart in Europe is the European Conference on Religion, Spirituality, and Health, mostly European universities. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of cross-fertilization which it's sad, but that's what should be done. Now, in terms of the Bible on religion and health, this is the editor of the Handbook of Religion and Health, and it's a compendium of research on various things about religion. Not much on spirituality, because spirituality is hard to quantify, whereas religion can quantify a little bit more. So the research in that book is really in three areas. One is if you have a faith belief, you have a better sense of well-being. And this is just one study. There's actually a whole slew of studies. The limbic system, the immune system, the heart rates, a whole bunch of stuff. The other is if you attend church regularly, and this is irrespective of the faith, of any church, you can live up to 7 years longer. The other is prayer practice. I was involved in this particular research, and it was discursive prayer, and it was basically reducing the amount of depression. So religious involvement can have effects all along down the line. Reduced immune interleukin, which it shows that the immune system is strong, well-being, happiness, liveliness, satisfaction, low rates of suicide. There are thousands of studies in his book that describe all of this, and it's very powerful. Koenig is a professor at Duke, a Catholic, by the way. Now, fertility rates. I found this interesting. We're talking about this under the concept of biology and consciousness, because now that we're conscious of the outside world, we start looking at studies, etc. The fertility rate is the rate at which the number of children per woman is born. Now, to maintain a culture, you need a minimum of 2.1 here. No cultures survive at 1.9 or less. And I think this is actually a little bit lower than this. It's changed since I did this. But the Islamic rate is 8.1. So with immigration in the U.S., we're at 2.1, we're okay. Without immigration, we're at about 1.6 in the U.S. France, 1.8. Italy, where a lot of Catholics are located, 1.2. Spain, 1.1. What does this mean? This means that a culture of death, where you have abortion, birth control, and capital punishment, that culture will not survive. So that thinking pattern will die out. God, the divine healer, has a way of self-regulating us. I mean, this isn't going to last, because those people that believe in that don't have offspring. They're gone. So that's something a lot of times we're not aware of. Now, I've done marriage counseling, marriage prep with people, and if I get a couple that says, well, we want to live together, and that's happening more and more, I don't get to that real quick, but what they do is they say, well, why are we here? I say, well, I'm here to help you have a long marriage. That's my purpose. If you accept that, then we'll work together. They always do. And then I find out that they're living together. And instead of preaching to them, I have found a more effective approach, especially if they're secularized and they're only there because Mama told them to be there. I mean, I'll say, well, if you live together, there's a 40% greater chance you're not going to get married. You're a 50% greater divorce rate in the U.S. if you cohabitate. In Europe, it's 80%. There's a greater divorce, 60% greater divorce rate of non-virgin bride, 47% male infidelity if cohabitating. The statistics are not good. The less educated usually are doing it. There's usually partly the less educated tend to do it more than the very educated. You can look these up. Then, after I get their attention, I say, now, that just happens to be Catholic teaching. I wonder why science and Catholicism are on the same page. And then they may start talking, but then it's back to the original question, why did you want me here? To help you have a long marriage or not? You have to decide, basically. Now, prayer and meditation, which is a word that's been kind of absconded within our public society, but meditation in our society now applies to all types of meditation, right? All types of prayer, whatever. It really comes from the Latin meditatio, which means to think. So the studies done by Herbert Benson of Harvard showed tremendous difference in tremendous improvements. Decreased metabolism, decreased heart rate, decreased rate of breathing, slower brain wave, reduced pain, etc. Okay. Pain management. Prayer is the second highest use of prayer, of dealing with pain, next to pain pills. Now, the University of Consciousness. Now, you didn't hear the program this morning, but I give you a little taste of it. And basically, consciousness and the universe are connected somehow, and I'll show you. Roger Penrose is the guy that Stephen Hawking went to get math help, because Stephen Hawking didn't have the math capability. And Roger Penrose helped him. Roger is at Cambridge. Consciousness seems to me to be such an important phenomenon that I simply cannot believe that it's something just accidentally conjured up by a complicated computation. It is the phenomenon whereby the universe's very existence is being known. One can argue that a universe governed by laws that do not allow consciousness is no universe at all. Rather interesting. He's 87 years old now. This is younger. I met him in Switzerland, and he is looking, and I attended a presentation by him, and he's looking at explaining consciousness at a quantum level. So this shows you how science is really on the cutting edge of trying to decide what this is about. Consciousness evolution, Father Teilhard de Chardin, who believed that evolution wasn't just biological, but it was also spiritual. The most telling and profound way of describing the evolution of the universe would undoubtedly be to trace the evolution of love. There is almost a sensual longing for community with others who have a large vision. The immense fulfillment of the friendship between those engaged in furthering the evolution of consciousness as a quality impossible to describe. Now, all of this sounds wonderful, but there's a problem, a major problem. Science did some studies, and they're always doing studies. Science did some studies, and what they did is they interviewed a set of subjects, and they took down what their preferences were. What was your political party preference? What's your religion preference? What's your race preference, culture preference, financial preference, whatever. A whole bunch of different categories. Then they gave a set of multiple choice questions or statements saying that research shows that if you picked Catholicism, research shows that Catholicism is the best religion. Or if you said, well, I'm a Democrat, research shows that the Democrats are much more powerful than whatever. Okay, so then they said people, when they went through, they confirmed their own bias by picking only those data that represented what they already said they were. That's not surprising. We go in with a certain bias, and now we're looking for information to support it. We ignore the other. The question is, it's really a rationalization. It's automatic. It's not deliberate deception. It's cognitive, evidence-converting beliefs, irrational primacy effect. It's illusory correlation. It's not real. But the problem is that let us, among without sin, the first throws a stone. Everything goes into a person from outside and defiled. But when it comes out of a person, that is what defiles from within people, from their hearts. Some evil thoughts. All these evil thoughts come from within, and they defile. I brought this slide up a step too early. What I meant to say first was that within the unconscious are these biases, and also our virtues. Interesting. Our habitual sins are the unconscious, our biases, our virtues that we've been practiced with. The question is, how do we flush that confirmation bias out into the conscious brain so that we can deal with it? Okay? And I'll tell a story I told this morning. I do some prison ministry and up in Palestine, Texas, and maximum security prison. And this black man came up to me, and they don't feel comfortable talking personal stuff inside the prison because they can get killed. But he trusted me. I was the deacon. I was from outside, etc. He said, I don't know what to do. I am fearful of white policemen. And I said, and he said, I know it's wrong. And I said, but that doesn't make you a racist. I want you to know that. Now, you've heard that term thrown around in the public forum a lot, right? But that doesn't make you a racist. And the reason is, you had something happen to you in the past, did you? And he said, oh yeah. And he said, so what I said is your brain is trying to protect you from that happening again. So it's what that is, the unconscious. The challenge is to bring it out. Now, to drive the point home even more emotionally, I said, a white woman says, I'm afraid of black men because, and does that make her prejudiced? If something happened to her before, and her brain is putting in the unconscious to try to protect herself in the future, that means she's not a racist. But both of you have the same problem. How are you going to get that out of the unconscious into the conscious brain? Because it's not right. We all know it's not right. But I'm not going to condemn you for it. I'm going to try to look for a way, we've got to do a way together to see how we can unload the unconscious into the conscious brain.
So this is a very important ministry in the church. When we are in counseling or in spiritual directions, we have to build up the relationship with the person who comes to us for help. And a lot of things we call confirmation bias in our unconscious, because this happened to us, it's traumatic, it's painful, and then sometimes it's causes wounds, distortion in our perception, or blockage in our own understanding. And then sometimes we want to, our own unconsciousness, for the sake of survival, we suppress them into the much deeper level of unconsciousness, and sometimes we forget of all of the stories about it. But we know that we have reaction against certain people because the unconscious we have to protect ourselves, and those become confirmed as being a bias. And so, and then sometimes we need to meet someone who loves us enough, we can trust enough that we can just settle out and take and remove all our defensive mechanisms, and we let them out. And these experiences, these painful past, traumatic experiences will come out, and then we will remember what's happened in the past. And that remember come along with the healing. That healing helps us to be free from that, and then that's when the bias becomes removed. It's not simply a confirmed bias anymore. It's become an experience in our life that enrich our life. It's make us become more compassionate to other people when they are going through that, and we can share with their pains, and later on we can help them to release from that bondage. This is really a process of moving the stuff, the bias from the unconsciousness to the consciousness, and it takes a lot of trust, a lot of love. So in order for us to serve the people who are going through a lot of pain, traumatic, just like sexual abuse, you need really to allow them to go through a lot of process of projecting, scapegoating, and sometimes using you to vent all of the anger on you. And you take all of these things, you just wish to understand that you love them enough that you allow them to empty all of the trashes on you. You become what? The trash box, the garbage can. And then you help them to recycle what's going on in their life. And that's His love. Jesus knew that. When He was on the cross, He became what? The scapegoat. We dumped on Him all of the things, all the hurts, all these biases, all of these kind of evil intentions on Him. And then He just used His love to transform all of these poisonous things that we inflict on Him, bodily, emotionally, and spiritually, and then He turned that into the medicine of life. So you see, that's what happened in the pastoral mystery of the church.
And that's a normal reaction of the brain. It's actually trying to protect itself.
Yeah.
So how do we unload that confirmation bias from the unconscious to the conscious? That leads us logically into mysticism and prayer. There are two types of prayer: discursive, in the Greek cataphatic, example, meditation, which is our guided meditation. That's where you're engaging the imagination. Meditatio, in the definition as we as Catholics would use. The secular world uses the term meditation to cover both of these, but that's not true. Contemplation is the other, contemplative, apophatic, and example of centering prayer. Now, what's interesting is these two categories are shared by all theistic faiths. All of them have both of those categories. Centering prayer facilitates contemplative or mystical prayer. Okay? So the question is this mysticism, how real is this? Well, what do the important people have to say? Thomas Merton, a Trappist monk. Our contemplation of him, God, is a participation in his contemplation of himself. Wow. The most beautiful emotion we can experience is the mystical. Albert Einstein. Bet you didn't expect that one. So, what is this stuff that they're talking about? Well, the omnibenevolent God, mystical experiences. I love the first quote, "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. More delightful is your love than wine." The first line of the Song of Solomon is talking about a mystical experience, and most people have not experienced this. You almost have to experience it to understand what is being said. And in terms of prayer, Matthew 6:6, when Jesus was asked, by the way, how do you pray? He didn't say the Our Father first. He said, when you pray, go to your inner room, close the door, pray to your Heavenly Father in secret, and He will hear you in secret. Do not be like the pagans who use many words. Whoa, that sounds like me for many part of my life. Telling God what I needed, when I needed it, how I needed it. I didn't need God. I had given Him the full instructions. He didn't need me. I didn't need Him. I told Him exactly what He needed to do. The consciousness evolution, He went about doing good and healing others. For everything He do good, is nothing He's free to reject, etc. So, prayer definitions. Centering prayer is a method to facilitate contemplative prayer. Contemplative prayer is opening our whole being to God. It is what God does. The first one is what we do. The other, second, is what God does or doesn't do. We're not going to tell Him what to do. Now, the desert fathers and mothers in Egypt went in the 4th century, went into the desert of Egypt to try to understand what Jesus was telling them to do in the writings. And what they had an author that followed St. Cassian. He wrote the Conferences, 425 AD. This is the longest work in Christian antiquity. I'll bet you haven't heard of it before. And it was the main reference that Benedict used for the rule of Benedict, for the monks and nuns ever since. The mind rejects the whole wealth and abundance of thoughts. The soul then pours out to God wordless prayers. Interesting. Something like what Jesus said. What are they getting at? Keep that in your head.
That's also related to what Deacon Bob just said about the affirming biases. And the thoughts sometimes are the biases.
Yeah.
And when you let go of these biases, then you begin to be empty, to be free, so you can see really who you are and your inner being.
That's right. So these are key guidelines on how to practice this prayer. You take a sacred symbol, usually if you're a beginner, a word, and as an intention to be with God. So it only has to have meaning to you. It's going to be 1 or 2 syllables. And I've got a handout about this prayer that I want to give to you, kind of summarizes this. Then you sit in a comfortable position. You don't have to make it a lotus position. At least I can get up if I do that. And you introduce the symbol of God's presence. And as thoughts come, and when you become aware of your thoughts, or when you, this is the key line. This is the most important line in the whole presentation. This is key. Thoughts in return. We all have thoughts. We're human. Okay. So when we become aware or engaged in our thoughts, then gently, ever so gently, let them go and return to your sacred word. And then at the end of 20 minutes, you have a gentle readjustment, and conclude in silence in a couple of minutes. And then we usually say, Our Father, not together, but in our minds, very slowly. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. In other words, we follow the advice of Matthew 6:6 after we went to our inner room. So, we might do that if we have time. I think we do. What kind of thoughts will come? Well, because we're human, we are going to have thoughts. Now, these thoughts are in the conscious brain. As we gently let them go, what's happening? We're letting more room in the conscious brain for the unconscious brain to unload. How are we going to get out of confirmation bias? This is the answer. Okay? Ordinary imagination. Then turn off the automobile lights. Attractions and aversions. That person really makes me angry. Insights and enlightenments. Now I understand the Trinity better. By the way, we make no judgments about thoughts. We treat all thoughts the same. We ever so gently let them go and return to our sacred work. We're not worried about remembering that third one. I guarantee you, you'll remember it. But you're going to make no judgment about the thoughts. You let them all go. Introspective reflections. I'm not doing so well at this centering prayer. Or I picked the wrong word. Don't change words, because that's a thought. You ever so gently let it go and return to your sacred word. And then there are thoughts that would be unloading of the unconscious, which is what we were kind of looking for here. But you can't look for thoughts while you're doing this. But I know from experience that can happen. I know I'll remember the hurt from my childhood. So let me give you some examples of experience in teaching this to thousands, which leads to the research that I reported on in Switzerland. I taught it to, I think it was about 10 people. 3 months later, I ran into a man. I didn't know him other than that presentation. And I said, how's it going? He said, well, not too well. I said, well, what's going on? He said, well, I had a problem with prayer. And I said, well, what happened? He said, well, I suddenly became aware of what really happened to me in Vietnam. And I didn't go into detail, but it was clearly PTSD. I said, what did you do then? And he said, I ever so gently let it go and return to God. Wow. The divine healer was healing him. That was buried in the unconscious for a reason. He wasn't ready to deal with it in his conscious brain. But his practice of this prayer now gave him the ability to deal with it, because God now knew that he could let it go when he gave it to him. I told that to the head of the psychiatric department of Baylor. His eyes popped out. He said, we don't know how to treat PTSD. I said, you do now, but God's the divine healer. So I put a proposal together for the VA hospital. They have floors of these people. Another example, well, I'll get to another example which leads into the research. Physical effects, lower blood pressure, less melancholy, less suffering. Most people report these. Less sleep means not that you can't sleep, but it means you need less sleep. Spiritual effects are the gifts of the Holy Spirit. Most commonly, peace is the most common one. Psychological effects. Now, if you were at Father's talk earlier, this will resonate a little bit. Psychological effects switch from false self, in other words, dependence on the energy centers of esteem. In other words, you're trying to get acceptance, you're drinking alcohol, drugs, you're seeking money, power, control, anger, hurt, and security. Future, work prioritizations, workaholic, and they switch to the true self, union with the indwelling God. That's why it's called centering prayer. And by the way, all the Abrahamic faiths believe in an indwelling God. So I've taught this practice, interfaith. It's astounding, because in the silence there's no dogma. Centering vehicle to contemplation. Contemplation gives God's action. Union, divine thought, or kiss. In a kiss, you can't speak. You wouldn't want to speak, you wouldn't be able to. But that's what we're seeking from God, is the divine kiss in the Song of Solomon. Now, there have been brain scans of Franciscan nuns doing centering prayer by this man, Newberg. This is a rather old study, and neuroplasticity shows that their brains did change. So it's actually physically affecting us. And why shouldn't it? Because of all the healings Jesus did in Scripture, every one of them was both spiritual and physical. Because we're not dualistic. Right? The question then is transcendent consciousness. I taught this prayer to 10 people at one time. And at the end of their first 20-minute set, they said, 3 of them started to have their eyes pop out, and they started to talk to me about having relived a near-death experience they had had in the previous part of their life during that first 20-minute sit. And they talked to each other. Every one of them had the same thing. 98% of people have pleasurable near-death experiences. That was categorized in my head. I put that away, stored it. I thought, boy, I was a fly on the wall. I had never seen that before. Then I, let me see here, I gotta be sure. Then I went to Cuba to present faith and science to the, spirituality and healing at the conference on that I mentioned, one of the second conference, which was Disorders of Consciousness. And it was the first time religion had been taught in public university in Cuba since the revolution. So I put a team together, we went down. The man I met there who let us have a whole day out of his international conference, turns out he's one of the world's experts in bringing people out of coma. And I said to him, suddenly it dawned on me, well, let me back up a minute. During the conference, he said, why don't you teach centering prayer? And I, in a loving, deacon way, I said, are you totally out of your mind? I mean, this is an atheist school, what are you talking about? He said, no, why don't you do it? Okay. His daughter was also an MD neuroscientist, and she invited all her neuroscience friends, and in Cuba, it's probably 85% Catholic, mostly buried. You know, it's practiced, but they're quiet about it. Okay? It's this underground church, like China. And in her first 20-minute set, in fact, back to story, this is worth it. I'm thinking it's in English, the whole conference is in English, because it's international. But I thought teaching this is critical, because I want it in their language. And some of the words are important. Then I remembered that the head of the Trappist organization that was set up internationally called Contemplative Outreach, the former chairman was a priest in Havana. I called him, I said, can you come over and teach it in Spanish? He said, sure. So I gave the science in English, they taught it in Spanish. All the neuroscientists are sitting there, doing this. I don't know if they're atheists or not. If they were, I have no idea what they were doing, but we explained it. He explained it. At the end of the 20-minute set, the daughter who organized it had a profound mystical experience. She had a complete out-of-body experience. It's pretty rare, less than 5%. Well, actually, partial, maybe less than 5%, even more rare as total. As near-death experiences are rare. And she started explaining to her neuroscience friends, their eyes were popping out. If I had explained that, they would have ignored me. But here, this was their fellow neuroscientists, and they never heard talk this way. Then it dawned on me to ask the question. Later, I go to CATECHETICAL, the guy who said do this on this conference, and I'll give you a whole day. Even went to the Cardinal, and he co-sponsored it, and was there at the opening. This was profound. This was in 2015. Getting into Cuba is not a problem. Getting out might have been a problem, but whatever, I did it. So anyway, I said to Calixto, I said, well, you are one of the world's experts in bringing people out of coma. Tell me, have you had many people tell you about near-death experiences? And he said, oh, all the time. And the scientist in me starts climbing across the table. And I said, you mean you got brain scans of these people? This is what I've been searching for. He said, well, I don't know if it was when they had the experience. So, bottom line, we established a research project, and he said, we get them to remember their experiences. That's just as valuable. Now, he's a neuroscientist. I assume that was because PTSD is critical too. I mean, people can remember their experience so vividly that they're launched back in time. So that's what we did. And in the discussion of what this was about, we learned that near-death experiences are the ones on the left, and mystical experiences are SCE. We call it spiritual contemplative experiences. And this is part of the presentation I did in Switzerland. There are 4 attributes that are shared by both of them, and I'm calling it transcendent, because this is the transcendent consciousness level between this life and the next. Paranormal out of body. People who have near-death experiences talk about looking down at their own body. Spaceless ecstasy. People that have spiritual, mystical experiences, and I mean profound experiences, will float above in their own minds. But
St. Paul had that experience. He was taken up to heaven. You read the letter that he wrote.
now they don't look back on their body. Well, I'm not surprised because they didn't die, but they're looking down at others. Second attribute, cognitive timelessness. In both cases, it feels like 5 minutes, but they've been doing this for an hour or whatever. Affective peace, a sense of peace, and a sense of wholeness and perfection which gives that peace. And a transcendent divine spiritual experience. So they experience God or angels or something like that. And a oneness with the universe, regardless of belief. So I noticed those 4 attributes being similar. I had now a guy that could identify these people, because I had no access to those subjects. And Father Walker, who teaches it in Havana, knows people that have done this. Because people don't want to talk about it. So only a spiritual director could do that. And then, of course, get their permission to have them participate. The next was to pick a tool. How are we going to study their brain? We want spatial measurement, solid, and temporal. In other words, we want to think certain of these things you've seen, I'm sure, in medicine. Some are very good at telling you where in the brain things happen, and others are very good at the speed with which they happen. Calixto quickly realized that both of these are very fast, and he wanted to get something that would do the best. So he picked this. That's quantitative EEG tomography. The preliminary conclusions: significant QEEGT correlations across broad frequency ranges between remembering NDE and SCE. This is consistent with the common Grayson scale attributes of both. Grayson scale was invented for NDE, but it includes those 4 attributes, so we applied it to both. And most figures were higher for SCE, consistent with the fact that subjects were not dying. And I won't go through all of these, but basically in these different frequency ranges, cognitive, concentrative, memory, attentiveness were all matching. There are limitations. You don't know for sure if it's the same as the actual experience. And we had 5 subjects in each category, so that reduces the statistical significance. That's what the scientists speak. So, I presented this in Switzerland about 5 weeks ago. And I wasn't the first to notice this. NDE was written by Dr. Moody, describing these attributes in 75, and the Grayson scale confirms it. And William James described mystical experiences in a variety of religious experiences as far back in 1902. But the problem with both of those guys is that science had not really recognized it. They thought this was airy-fairy. And it's hard to objectively study it because these are subjective experiences. So they would question the people who would describe them. Not so anymore. This conference, there were about 300 there a few weeks ago, profound. Penrose's given a presentation on quantum effects and how that could feed consciousness. A lot of amazing talks. But transcendent events is what should be of interest to us, because this is the transcendence between this world and the next. Isn't there a third one? And based on the discussion of the universe, probably not in the review I gave you this morning, you may guess what the third one is. The singularity at the beginning of the Big Bang. That's between this world and the next, in the creation. Spaceless? Well, there's no material in singularity, so it's dimensionless. There is no space. Timeless? There's no light. There's no time. Peace, perfection? Well, it's perfect. Anybody here familiar with entropy? Entropy is a measure of this disorder in the universe. Second law of thermodynamics said entropy always increases. Well, at the singularity, entropy was zero. It was perfectly ordered. Transcendent, divine, religious, oneness, universal. Well, Einstein's unified equation said four forces are unified. So Einstein's theories led to these four. They match. I've not seen this thing put like that anywhere else, but the point is that I believe what Augustine of Hippo said, and that is, let's study nature in more detail to find out what God's telling us. Let's unload that unconscious to get rid of those prejudices and turn our conscious brain over to God and surrender. Now, what does that mean? You talk about universe oneness. You've heard that people sometimes talk about that. Well, in a sense, this is my graphic finale. There's unity in the universe, but this is outside space and time. All three of them. That's for God. I got to tell you this. This wasn't a plan. I'm reading Stephen Hawking's last work, and it was actually a compilation of his writings. Maybe you know what I'm talking about. Big, small answers to big questions, or something like that. And he was an atheist when he died. And of course, everybody says, well, if he was an atheist, he was a genius. You know, don't let that fool you. Okay. So he put in there his reasoning why he was an atheist. This is what it was. I nearly fell over. Because at the singularity there was no time, there could be no God, because God didn't have time to create the universe. God created time. So basically the God that he does not believe in is also the God that I don't believe in. He didn't say anything. But the guy was so steeped in science that I don't attack him, but the logic was flawed. There's no question about it.
You have to say God has no time. And
That's your outside of time. He created time. It would be like saying that the person who invented the Volkswagen consigned himself to have to live in it.
Yeah.
What? Excuse me?
So,
Okay.
yeah. Any questions?